All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Today is Friday, June 9th, and you are joining us for our Washington State University Board of Regents retreat. So we have a jam-packed day of some good stuff that we will be looking at all day long, but we are going to get right into the heart of our first kind of business components of our agenda this morning, and we have some guests with us. We are going to move specifically right into the athletics budget, and we this morning have Leslie Brunelli and Athletic Director Pat Chun and two others with us at this time. We have 3 action items to discuss. And so what I'd like to do is open it with discussing the first action item, which is the athletics budget adjustment for fiscal year 2023, and the propose that the Board of Regents approve an athletics budget adjustment for the fiscal year. So with that, I'll turn it to you to give us more context on that, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Regent Dickinson, and good morning, everybody. What we'd like to do is go through a series of slides that replace frame the next 3 action items to put the everything into perspective.
Excellent.
And then we'll address each of the action items individually, if you don't mind. Give it to Pat.
Yes. Can we hear it?
Can everybody hear okay? It's very echoey.
It's the room. That's the reason we don't do meetings in here very
So
often.
Leslie, just.
They can hear okay on YouTube on the mics. Okay, perfect. So
Thank you, Leslie.
So I'm going to read a statement I put together, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. And I'll use my outside voice. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today our current financial picture and to answer your questions. Throughout this process, we have been committed to seeking the truth, to determining where we stand, how we got here, and then being transparent about all of it. Ultimately, as a leader of our department, I am responsible for what occurs under my watch, and I own any of our current financial challenges. It has been well documented the annual budget constraints that surround WSU athletics. Since my arrival at Washington State in 2018, a key tenet of my leadership has been fiscal responsibility, and our department understands that commitment. Early in my tenure, we implemented several changes to our budgeting process, including numerous checks and balances, both within athletics and with the WSU Office of Finance and Administration. In FY22, WSU Athletics reported a balanced budget, which also included a surplus. To our knowledge, this was the first balanced budget we had in over a decade. FY23 did not meet our expectations for several reasons. Based on the information available at this time, WSU Athletics is projected to end FY23 with a $11.5 million budget deficit. While the work continues on closing out FY23, which includes several mitigating steps we have implemented in recent weeks, there are multiple factors that contributed to our deficit: a decrease in the Pac-12 conference revenue distribution, revenues falling short of projections for WSU Athletics, operational costs exceeding the approved budget, and transitions in the athletic CFO role. We will dig a little bit deeper in each of those areas in today's presentation. Looking ahead to FY24, the proposed FY24 budget of $83.4 million represents a $3.7 million reduction to the expected FY23 actual performance, and additional efforts to monitor the budget will be presented today, which includes a fiscal calendar of meetings, reports, and other deliverables. We must do better, and we will. We have and will continue to make any and all necessary adjustments and changes. Before bringing in Leslie Brunelli and John Harlow and Matt Skinner into the conversation, I'd like to thank the 3 of them for all their additional support these past few weeks. Thank you to the Regents in advance for careful consideration of our budget. And now I invite Leslie and her team to begin our presentation.
Thank you. And Regent Dickinson, as you have questions or anyone on the Regents, if you'd like to interrupt us, please feel free to do so.
Okay.
The first slide here summarizes what Pat just mentioned, our anticipated $11.5 million budget shortfall for the current fiscal year. Now, we still have 3 weeks left, of course, in the fiscal year, and then a month to close out that information. And so we do anticipate that this is accurate. We will come back to you, of course, in the month of September and report where we are before we work on the NCAA AUT, where we roll up all of the financial information.
You're gonna have to speak up, Leslie.
Wow,
sorry. You can see that I'm okay.
Yeah.
Use my outside voice. Well, also, in addition to action item 1, where we look at fiscal year 23, we will propose for you the transfers, and we don't have that listed here on the screen. Matt will walk through how we have to reconcile the end of the fiscal year with a cash deficit. And then finally, we'll talk about fiscal 24's budget. And fiscal 24 will be interesting as we work through that with Pat and John Harlow. I'm here at the table with us. You will see that the budget is more than the fiscal 23 budget. However, it is less than where we expect fiscal 23 to end up. So that's a little bit of a challenge, that it is a larger budget than the current year, but less than what we are actually expending. And of course, Pat has mentioned to you the Pac-12 shortfall. He's mentioned this information on the slide here, what has caused the problem for fiscal 23, in addition to the Pac-12 shortfall that we have been anticipating due to the media rights issues. We do have revenues that are less than budget. Matt and John will walk through where those occurred. And we also have operating costs that have exceeded budget. A lot of that can be pushed back to inflation when our teams have to travel and our teams have issues like the per diem. Those all exceeded our expectations for the year. We are going through in a review, and John has been doing this work for the past 6 or 7 weeks now to look through where fiscal 23 is, and we have documented a list of ways that we will proactively work forward in fiscal 24 with Matt and John at the helm. Do you want to talk about Pac-12?
Yeah, so this has been well documented. There have been several issues from our conference that date back really from the start of the Pac-12 network, and what the expectations were, things that were communicated over recent years and where we stand today. So ultimately, the damages over the course of the next 2 years, which result from a combination of overpayments from one media partner, another small percentage from another media partner in which we did not meet the average amount of required telecasts, really was because of the pandemic. And the other piece of it is just construction costs and resetting the old downtown San Francisco buildings based on the terms of the lease. So, and then dipping into reserves to mitigate some of that. So the totality of it is 5.7 million per school. And that's going to be split up over the course of 2 years. So the presidents have been informed, and the ADs throughout since the beginning of when the issue started, and the presidents ultimately voted on how we would take the damages over the course of 2 years.
And I want to point out, Pat just mentioned 5.7, and you see on the slide here 3.5 in the current year and then 4 million in the next year. The reason we're using 4 million in the next year is because our original budget information for fiscal 24 was actually higher. So they brought that number down in addition to having the shortfall from the media rights package. So that's why accumulated for us, it is a $7.5 million change. Do you want to add anything to that? Because you have the better context of how that's reported out.
I think we'll get into it in some of our, in our upcoming slides.
Okay, great.
Judy, did you have a?
This is fiscal 23. I'm sorry.
Judy had a comment.
Okay.
It's maybe coming in the further slides. I guess my question was going to be some of the unexpected shortfalls in the Pac-12. Do we know that the issues with moving the office and overpayment of media, do we believe that's resolved, or is there potential for that to continue into additional fiscal years?
They've been, I mean, Kirk may add more, but they've been transparent since day one. Once they started to uncover things, I think the positive and leadership transition with the new commissioner, as he was learning more and uncovering more about what the challenges were with the Pac-12. I mean, there have been a lot of personnel changes. Part of the issue that was mentioned in terms of the long-term planning number that was given to us by the past CFO, and there was actually either no communication or minimal communication that number had been delivered to the campuses. So there's just been as where the last regime ended up and where we're at today is very different because there's been transparency from the conference office about what the issues are.
Thank you.
If I could, Judy, great question. We are negotiating with the overpaid media partners on getting a final signed deal that would say, here's exactly what the dollars are. What we put in there is not a conservative number, but a realistic number of where we believe that's going to land. If you say, do we have the signed thing today? No. Okay. Do I think we'll have the signed thing in the next 2 weeks? Yes. So, and we don't anticipate that there's any big, changes there. But, part of the reason we also waited from May to June on some of these things is because all this was still in flux, and we thought, okay, it's going to be settled and we can have a real conversation with real numbers. And it's more settled than it was in May, but still not completely all the way. However, don't anticipate that it would get significantly different from this, either good or bad.
And the office move, is that complete and the
Yes.
costs around that is finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
We moved out of the most expensive real estate in the country, literally was where the Pac-12 headquarters were, to a less expensive area in California. But, it went over by 10 million or 11 million on the move, which is a, huge number. Long-term though, it's going to be much better because it's less annual operating costs for the conference, but still, yes.
I think the annual rent of downtown San Francisco was between 7 and 8 million. So to our new commissioner's credit, he has reduced overhead costs significantly, just in how they behave as an organization. So
do you have a sense of what it's been reduced to?
I think it's about between 2 to 3 million. It's really the TV production that, they're basically working remotely as a staff. So they've reduced just the sheer number of offices, but it's a TV production. And the world's changed. In the San Francisco offices, you have satellite dishes. They're obsolete now. So there's just a lot of things that are different between what happened, over a decade ago.
We'll move on and look more in detail at the fiscal 23 budget to actual. And on this slide, you can see what Pat mentioned in fiscal 22, the athletics department ended as a positive situation. A lot of that was due to refunding of debt during COVID and bringing those proceeds forward. You can see, however, this year, the fiscal 23 budget, as you approved, it was 80.6 million in revenues, 81.6 million in expenditures. And then you see where that has been exceeded, either on the revenue side or the expense side. And John is going to go into that in detail. What we've done on this slide is show you the impact of operations and then the impact of the Pac-12 shortage at the bottom there. If you add up that 8 million and the 3.5 million for the current year, that's where we're arriving at the $11.5 million difference. I'm going to just warn you at the front, because John, Matt, and I have been working through this for the last week. There are some rounding issues within these tables. So we are aware of that and we are fixing those as we speak. John, if you'd like to speak to the revenues a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I will go one layer deeper here. As you saw in the previous slide, we are projecting as of now a $2.5 million shortfall in the revenue. Primarily, we'll get into the negatives, but we did have some positive variances, at least as it stands right now. We outperformed in ticket sales, we outperformed in our revenue, in our sponsorship and advertising as well. And kicking into the negative, the biggest component of that is $1.4 million operational revenue shortfall from Pac-12. That is on top of the media rights shortfall that was discussed in the previous slide. Other areas we saw at a $700,000 miss in our waivers and fees. That's attributed to the enrollment decline. We receive fee revenue and waiver revenue tied to enrollment. Those have decreased. The other area there, our major bucket, is a $600,000 shortfall we're projecting in other fees related to parking, some of our concessions. Now, I will say that's as of the information we have right now. There still is 3 weeks left in the fiscal year, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but as far as our annual giving year goes, we still have a few weeks to make up some ground there. CAF and Pat are working really hard to close that gap, and we still have some ancillary fees rolling in as well. But as of now, we are projecting a $2.5 million shortfall on the revenue side. Going into the expenses then, as noted previously, overall projecting a $5.5 million shortfall or a budget overrun there. Really three major buckets. First bucket there is compensation. We're projecting a $300,000 overrun, primarily due to exceeding budget in student wages and overtime. We also had to bring a handful of employees up to the new FLSA threshold as of January 1, where that raised our output on payroll. We also had some increases that we gave to some contractual employees as well. Second major bucket that we're forecasting is a $400,000 overrun in financial aid, primarily due to we have degree completion and then medical degree completion financial aid that we award. That is when an athlete or student athlete has exceeded its athletic eligibility, but we still honor their scholarship as they finish up their coursework. The same way, if they've been medically DQ'd, we honor that scholarship as they finish out. And we're still seeing ramifications of COVID. During that time, NCAA expanded roster sizes. They also expanded the scholarship amounts that we could award, and we're still seeing some of those student athletes work their way through the coursework. So roster sizes have been reduced back to the normal or pre-COVID limits, but we're still seeing some of those student athletes or former student athletes finish up their degree work. So the final bucket here, and this is really everything outside of those two, where we're seeing a $4.8 million expense overrun. Two subcomponents of that, what we call team expenses, that's team travel, recruiting, student athlete meals, medical expenses, and then our other expenses, which is maintenance, custodial, administrative fees, those types of things. Still working, obviously, again, this based on information that we know now, still working through some of the details and drudging through as we prepare for the audit and fiscal year end. But as of right now, projecting a $5.5 million expense overall.
And so at the beginning of May, when we realized that there was something, a problem with fiscal 23, John, Matt, and I worked with Pat and staff. Thank you, Kirk. Worked with the,
Leslie.
Oh, wait, one second. I just wanted to,
sure.
on that last slide, I think one point, a really important point, and John, thanks for going through that, is I just want to emphasize the expense variance was not due to us paying our coaches all kinds of money that was not budgeted. And if you look at these, and again, we've got to live within our means. I'm not arguing that. A lot of this was for our student athletes and various types of things there. It doesn't excuse it, but I just don't want people going, well, you paid a whole bunch of 7-figure coaches a lot more money, and guess what? That was the reason we went over. That's not the case, because we were really careful with salaries and contracts and things like that. So again, it's still more money than we should have spent, but on the other hand, it's a different kind of category than most people may attribute the overage to, and I think it's important to point that out.
Could I also just ask a clarifying question and maybe a statement? Is some of this also somewhat resolved in implementations of budget modeling and transparency around the ability to kind of see things a little bit more in terms of some of the expenses? I recall in some of our earlier conversations, just even having the ability to have coaches and folks within athletics be able to monitor some of these expenses a little bit differently. Am I picking up any of that conversation related to this, or am I thinking of something different?
Yes and no. I think not the budget model discussion, but with the workday transition, things certainly look differently. So I think that's what you're referring to. John and his team are working with modernization right now to streamline and create different reporting to be able to provide to Pat and to the coaches to show things a little bit more clearly for them. So yes, that there is certainly a workday impact.
I just think about the layering effect of all of the things that we're implementing at the same time, the budget model, the workday, and obviously there are impacts to a lot here, and that's a piece of it. So, okay.
And as we go into 23 in May, we realized that there was something amiss with the athletics budget, and John and Matt stepped in very quickly to assist Pat and his team. And Pat put into place several issues to stop the spending and get control of what was going on. You want to summarize those?
Yeah, really, we needed to give John and Matt and team here enough time to really do a deep dive into our budget and really resolving what was out there in FY23. We learned was probably the biggest issue. So we did some standard things, we've done before relative to pausing or freezing certain positions that are open in athletics, created new layers of approval just to make sure that, hey, everything that we're doing at this point really has more eyeballs on it. So as we just set the tone for how we're going to have to operate going forward is really the big part of that.
And I think what you'll see is a lot more collaboration between athletics and finance and administration. But, Matt and John are the epitome of that work that's being done. But there are a lot of folks throughout finance and administration who are assisting. Olivia Yang and the project management team are working through the capital projects to make sure that we're delivering projects that the donors are expecting that athletics needs, but we're doing that in a cost-effective way. With Regent Shower's mention here, we have modernization at the table working through some changes with Workday so that the reporting is better and more robust and more accessible to the athletics department. But I just learned yesterday that under Matt's leadership, the procurement team is working with athletics to make sure that our contractual arrangements for travel coming up in the fall are as tight as they can be and as the most efficient as they can be. So there is a lot of effort going into helping athletics right this ship. And now we're going to move over, if we can, into the fiscal 24 budget. We'll talk more about fiscal 23 when we come to that action item, but I'm going to have John spend more time on this. I do want to point out, Kirk's point here is really important. You'll see the historical picture of the budget here for athletic, the current year, and then what we're proposing for fiscal 24. But you'll notice the next 3 years are dimmed out, and they're dimmed out for a reason. We just don't know what the media rights contract is going to look like. So that is really just math being pushed through to show 3 years of activity. We have to do a lot of work to firm up what fiscal 25, fiscal 26, and fiscal 27 look like. But that work really cannot occur until after the Pac-12 media deal is completed. So we'll focus on fiscal 24. I'm going to talk through this.
Yep. Thanks, Leslie. As Leslie mentioned, and this is a summary and a view I think we've shared several times in the past, so I think we're used to seeing this, but just for context, we've shown previous years where we landed in 22, the projections that we've discussed in 23 there in the middle, and then 24. And so we have gone back to the table and completely revamped 24, looked at everything again, not just what we've done previously, and rolled that forward. We've blown it up, and kudos to Pat and his team for being 100% diving in on all these as well to make sure our revenue projections are accurate, make sure our expense lines are achievable as well. So just a few different areas we'll call out. This does project a slight increase in donations and contributions, primarily related to the annual fund. That's an area we've had success in recently, and I think that there's still room to grow there as well. I'll point out, you'll notice the growth there in the NCAA and the Pac-12 line. That's still the plan. We're holding in that spot, still the planning rate that we have shown in the last couple. So this was pre the media rights issue, but you'll notice the shortfall is called out separately down below. So we've held that separately. So the NCAA and Pac-12 line will actually be the net of what's in there and the shortfall, but we did want to call those out separately. One an operational shortfall, the other one being the media rights. The other area I'll call out is our waivers and student fees. We've gone back and reset that based on where enrollments are at now. We've relooked at our waivers that we get and the fees that come in with that as well. Moving down to the expense side, compensation, we've gone back and looked at all of our contractual employees, the positions that we have open now, taking into consideration the civil service mass salary increase, and we think we've readjusted our student wages and our overtime budgets because we knew that was an issue in this current year. We've reset those. Worked with athletic compliance on our scholarship piece to look at our roster composition right now, taking into consideration the 2.5% tuition increase. We feel like where we're at with our student athletes that are here and coming, we feel good about that number as well. In the sports programs, as a reminder, that's our team travel, our recruiting, medical, student athlete meals. That's really where the lion's share of our reduction work has come. You'll see that is down more closely to a 22 level, but even lower than that. We've worked really hard. Pat's team has worked really hard to set realistic budgets there. Move down to the debt payments. This one is a key piece. You notice it holds flat, but really in FY24, there was said to be an increase in athletics debt. So what this takes into consideration is athletics has a debt service, a general revenue bond that comes callable in later on this summer. And we have worked with our financial advisors to look at what that looks like if we were to pursue that refunding opportunity. And right now we've conservatively projected that could offer some savings for us in FY24. Obviously that is subject to market shifts and the rates, but we are holding a conservative reduction there, and we'll continue to pursue that in the coming weeks. And then the last area we'll call out there, the other area that's been the biggest area of reduction to close our gap toward our balanced budget. Still some work to do there, obviously, but we're inching closer, and that's in our other expense area. That's in maintenance, some of the overhead, administrative dues, those kinds of things. That's where the other major reductions are said to be moving forward. But still a little bit of work to do to close that gap. But it's been an extraordinary collaborative effort between finance and athletics, and we feel confident in the objectives moving forward.
I do want to mention again the point that John made about the debt payment. The debt was escalating up for next year because of the bonds that were refunded during COVID. And so we were expecting an additional debt service payment. But if the possibility for refunding this summer presents itself, and we do think that it will before the summer closes, we'll be able to realize some savings in that line. Again, the budget is not quite balanced yet. We are $400,000 away from that. We talked with both President Schultz and Pat last week about should we force that to be zero, and Kirk felt very strongly that it felt artificial to be forcing it to zero at this time, that we need to do some work over the summer to bring that back into alignment, and that's our plan.
Maybe before we move to the next slide, John, you've spent your last month probably doing this. It's easy to look at the columns and go, well, yeah, you just tweaked this one a little bit. You sat down in the afternoon and a bar napkin and, made it all work. I think it's important maybe for you just to spend a little bit of time. You mentioned you did a deep dive on this, but it's been a really deep dive. And, John worked for athletics, moved over to Stacy's shop. And so, we happen to have a person on staff that's got a lot of background and experience with Cougar athletics and with the other parts of the university. So, John, I just don't want to quickly move beyond the slide and everybody goes, well, this really couldn't have taken that long to do. And I want to go back to Leslie's comment. When they showed this to me and we were $400,000 off, they said, we can tweak it so it looks zero. And I just said, I think that's artificial. It truly is at this point. I'd rather put it with 400,000 saying we're still working. We know we got to get that to zero, than just make the numbers work and everybody go, that's just cooking the books to make it look right for the Regents meeting. So, John, maybe just talk a little bit more about what you've been spending the last month doing.
Yeah, a thorough deep dive, as you alluded to. And as Leslie mentioned, this has been a collaborative effort where we've leaned on our expertise and our modernization team. We've gone back through and looked at every single report that we've run. I think I made a comment to Matt not too long ago. We were spending time going through 120,000 transactions from FY23 to see where money's going, where money's coming back at, and how some of those things can shake forward into 24. And so we've gone back. This has been a full-on commitment from all the department heads and coaches that I've met with thus far. What's achievable, what's not. And I'll say this is not going to be a painless deal, but it's absolutely achievable. You look back in previous years, we hit those goals expense-wise. It'll be a complete cultural buy-in. I know that. But it has been a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of 2 a.m. wake-ups of, did I calculate that correctly? Is it pulling through correctly? And we've had a lot of eyes tying this out. And it has not been a short process. It's been a very thorough investigation.
I'm confident that many of you have gone through zero-based budget exercises and know how much time is involved in putting together a budget from scratch. While this wasn't that exercise, it was as close to it as you can get, especially when we had just 4 weeks to pull this together.
So before I see that we kind of jump into, which I appreciate, and I think the board will be anxious to see what we're going to do culturally and process-wise shifting. I'd like to understand a little bit more around how we're shoring up 2023, because that's where, as the Board of Regents, we're going to have some accountability to understanding where those funds are coming from and how we're doing that. I feel like it's important for me to share that I was able to spend some time with a couple of our, prominent key legislators who have concern and have questions for the Board of Regents, quite frankly, not even so much the athletic department and the finance department. And a very two legitimate questions that were proposed to me were, one, what's the structural change, or what's the structural kind of number that we need to maybe really evaluate as a university? Is there a number? Is there a deficit that we just know that it might cost to operate athletics at Washington State University? And can we figure what that might look like? We know there are other universities in the Pac-12 that operate with the deficit, and they live with that, right? And the university covers that. I'm not suggesting we're doing that or going to, but that is reality for some of our Pac-12 schools. And so that was a question around that piece of it. Is there a structural component that we really need to look at here? Can we actually have a profitable athletics or a break-even athletics budget? Because the credibility is waning, if not, tarnished at the moment, because we've been here having this conversation with a very positive outlook, and then find ourselves, struggling to kind of make right of that. The second question that I, again, just want to be really clear, I think there is, people want a definition, or some of the legislature questions were around what does institutional support mean? And let's define that and be a little bit clear on that, because you don't necessarily want perception of what dollars are being used and how they're being used. We'd like to have good clarity on that as well.
I might defer to President Schultz to speak to the first issue of what is the overall outlook of athletics, and should there be acknowledgement that there is some deficit, and then we'll discuss the institutional support line, certainly.
Do you want me to say something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I received some emails from some of our members of our university community, around this, and it was interesting. I just went and looked at Cal Berkeley, who reported, that they finished the year in the black by $2 million. They get a $30 million per year subsidy from the institution. I'm not arguing this is what we need to do. It's just that if you look out there, it's easy to look at other schools and say, how come we can't be like these other schools? And this is, you can go look at it on the web. This is not hard to find. And that's what a bunch of other colleagues in the conference have elected to do over time. So the question really is this a fool's errand to say every year we're going to be balanced? And we know it's really, that there has to be at some level of institutional support at some particular point, that you just say that's what it's going to take us to run athletics program. That today is not the day to make that decision. It's just, it's easy to look elsewhere and go, everybody else seems to be doing it. How come we can't? When you really look at what other places are doing within our footprint, it's a very different set of things. We've tried to keep our student fees to a minimum, university support to a minimum, and all those, and that's been our choice. But we operate on this razor's edge that means that any little thing that pushes you off it. And I think that's the question is that sustainable? So this clearly needs to be a discussion, not for today, but the board engage in it at other meetings. It's not at the end of the fiscal year when we're doing this to say what's reasonable, what's appropriate. Do we want to do that and use that as an option? And like any option, it could be one that you say no, but it could be one that you say, this is the realism of what we have to do. So I think that's a very good question that one of our legislative colleagues brought up that deserves board attention in the future.
I just had when you were looking at the Berkeley funding, where was the money coming from that Berkeley was putting into athletics? Was that coming out of student tuition? Was it coming out of student fees? Was it? Because we do have things like student fees that go to athletics now.
No, Pat and John and the rest of you can answer this maybe. I mean, what I read, it just said the chancellor had allocated $30 million a year and just said when she is no longer chancellor, they're not sure if that will continue or not. So they didn't, typically if it's a student fee type thing, that's just labeled that way. This I think was institutional support of some nature, and where it came from, I didn't see, but I didn't honestly, Judy, take the time to go try and look at it.
Just curious.
Yeah.
If I could add, and I gave Regent Shower and Regent Ramos this historical perspective that this really started over a decade ago because of the verbalized forecast of what the Pac-12 network was supposed to be. So Kirk's predecessor, my predecessor, what was told to them was they could expect on the high end 10 to 12 million a year, specifically from that one network. So decisions were made in that moment that we used to receive 5 to 6 million in additional university support. That was reduced with the expectation 10 to 12 million would come. There was also commitments to building facilities, much needed facilities. We weren't set up operationally to fundraise for those facilities, but so they took what the expected forecast was going to be. And where we sit today, it's 2 million a year. So the projection is over 100 million over the course of the last 10 years. So that is really where decisions were made over a decade ago, based on our past commissioner, what this university needed at the moment. And that's why we're at, and decisions that were made and how we were funded by campus. So, but that is a discussion for some other time.
think that's a very good point. Thank you, Patrick.
And Regent Dickinson, to your question about institutional support, you will see on the slide 1.4 million for the current year and then 2.4 for next year. This is part of the 6-step process that the board was brought into back in November of 2020, certainly before my time, where there was a commitment made to bring back a portion of that. Matt can speak to that a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, so again, that was November 2020, that 6th step. Everybody hear me okay? This is fun. I'll step from behind the screen.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, November 2020, we reviewed athletics with the board, proposed a 6-step financial recovery plan. One of those steps was $2 to $3 million per year at the time in new institutional support athletics. As you can see, we haven't quite reached that level. Part of that is university constraints in providing those funds, but that has been forecasted for over 18 months to go to 2.4 million for fiscal year 24. So a $1 million increase. To some of our legislative colleagues' questions, that is non-state funds. We're not allowed to use state funds to support intercollegiate athletics per law. So we use some other central revenue streams to create that funding stream.
Are tuition dollars being used
No
for that?
tuition
No.
dollars,
Okay.
no tuition dollars or state funds.
No,
Those
okay,
are
thank you.
largely interest revenue, actually.
Thank you.
Yes. Questions with, I guess, the past. Is that okay to?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yep.
So on the expense side, is there, on the expense side, is there more detail available on the 4.8? That's sort of the big bucket.
John, can you speak? That's the other,
Yeah.
Yeah, during the deep dive that I've gone through with this, really focused on the overall NCAA category buckets, to try and figure out where those overages are instead of getting down to the sport and department level. Now we're certainly going through that now as we approach year end and prepare for the audit. So we'll be able to itemize those here shortly, but we don't have them down to the sport level or department level necessarily, more so in just the team travel, sort of the subcategories of that: team travel, recruiting, meals, those kinds of things. We do have that. I don't have it here in front of me, but we can certainly provide that.
Okay. And that'll all be available to us as part of the audit. I think that would be interesting to see.
That's okay.
You know, it's an area that people are always interested in terms of how are we treating student athletes and what's going on in that space. So
Absolutely.
it's important for us to see that. Okay. And then just in understanding, I know you're going to talk about what we are doing going forward culturally, but in understanding how our budget reconciliation and sort of reporting back to the line managers has worked in the past, sort of what was happening that people weren't realizing they were going over budget? What was the actual sort of on the ground behavior? Like people were not getting reports back from accounting of like, here's where you are in your budget. I just want to hear that kind of concretely.
So without getting too much into personnel matters, probably the easiest thing for me to say is in the last 13 months, we've been without a full-time athletic CFO for 5 of those months, including this month. So we've recognized what the problem is. We've worked hard to get to a different place. Obviously, hiring all falls on me, so I take ownership of that. But we've identified we don't have coaches. I want to make clear we don't have any coaches that were spending over, like weren't aggressively or intentionally spending over budget. The budgets they were spending to were unfortunately not set correctly. So, and as we go into resolving what was going on, it was pretty clear just some dollars were misassigned, and that led to just unfortunately miscommunication. But we fix that, and we'll continue to fix it. And it's just a bunch of layers of the things, you know, when John was with us, the things we were doing before, we just because of all the transitions going on, we just need to do a better job even with all the transitions.
And one of the more significant things that we found, John worked on early, is that there were many purchasing card transactions and travel transactions that had been incurred that had not been reconciled and processed through the system. So they had been incurred, but they weren't showing in the coach's individual line budgets. So they made assumptions that I have dollars to spend because these expenditures happened so long ago. Surely they're back through the system at this point.
Yep.
Brett and then John.
Yeah, if this is all right to comment now, First, for the athletic director, I wanted you to know, I don't know of any athletic director that's enjoyed the level of support that you have. And in spite of some of these dust-ups that happen, I have not heard anything otherwise. And I echo my personal support and wanted you to know that going forward. So I want you to be happy here. I look at the big picture, and athletics is in such a better place than it was when my tenure started, that I can't even quantify how much things have improved. So thank you for that. I believe your previous comments touched on it, and you explained it better than I can, but the old Pac-12 media deal is just the gift that keeps on giving, where the problems with that we're hoping to resolve going forward results in the repeating problem we've seen. I view the current situation similar to what Congress went through with the debt ceiling discussion. We have to find a way to resolve the spending. It's not an option. We have to find a way to do that, or not the spending, but the bills that we do. But to drill down on what the chair asked earlier, I need assurance, and the president can speak to that, so that as we go out and face the public and the faculty, that whatever we have found to resolve the current fiscal issue, that no academic money is being used, or research money, or any other true functions of the university, the educational funding. We just need that assurance that we have found other revenue.
Okay, so I think we'll get further into that piece of it before we, so I'd like to just allow Regent Shower to have a comment. Do you have a comment, John?
I did, but I'm going to yield my time back.
Okay. Final.
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the board here? Good. Okay. So that being said, then let's jump ahead. I'm assuming you will take us through kind of future things that we're doing. I still am feeling like we need more information around how these action items come to bear, and understanding what that looks like. So, okay.
The next portion of this is the discussion about how we are making this work moving forward, including keeping John engaged. But we have implemented some additional oversight. Pat and I will be meeting a lot. We are now close friends, but we're going to establish a group of folks that will be working together. That's the two of us. Actually, it's all four of us at this table. Regent Ramos has agreed to join us on a monthly basis, and we will bring in a member of the Faculty Senate working through Provost Chilton, Chancellor Chilton's office, to bring somebody from Faculty Senate to be available to work with us. In addition to that, Pat and I will meet monthly with the president, and we'll also begin resuming the presentations to you every time that the regents meet. That apparently had occurred prior, then it stopped for a period of time, and so we will certainly be bringing those back, and every meeting of the regents will expect to give you an athletics update. Stabilizing the athletics operation. Pat mentioned that he is without a CFO right now. You'll see on this slide it's mentioned as an AFO, an area finance officer. We do need to hire that position. That position previously did not report to Pat. It will report directly to Pat now, but they will have a dotted line back to my office, so that we will have a matrix operation here and have oversight of that individual and have them a little bit more visible in the athletics organization. John will remain on board as long as we need him to be. Thank goodness for that. Without his oversight, this would be a very tough place to be right now, but he will be aggressively onboarding that new individual, and we will maintain part of the search committee as well.
So Leslie, can you talk to how this has affected what you would have been doing?
At the macro level, I think this just wasn't on my radar, but every institution has an issue that they have to deal with, and certainly athletics is a significant portion of the institution's operation. What else would I personally be doing? I'm onboarding right now too, so that's significant. The biggest challenge I think that we have in finance and administration is John has a day job. And so we have to figure out how to support John through Matt's operation. John's just recently had a retirement in the treasury operation. So his summer was going to be spent working through that vacancy. And now we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage that so that we're able to allow John to work more with athletics. So yeah, it's a challenge, but we will work through it, certainly. I appreciate the question. What else we're doing to strengthen financial management? And I mentioned that we're using our modernization team to work on new reporting from Workday. We're doing additional training for the athletic staff, including the coaches, for the issue that Regent Redmond mentioned, the unreconciled items. Things have to be reconciled immediately. That's just an expectation that, of course, those things are pushed through the system so that you have a visibility and transparency there. So we'll increase the training. We're going to implement a formal budgetary approval process. You may not know, this is very much in the weeds. For the institution, when we allow a unit to exceed their budget, we have a very formal process of we are allowing you to do so with these dollars, and the budget is actually amended within the system. Athletics has not been doing that, so we're going to have them do the same process within athletics so that if additional dollars are provided to XYZ operation, whether it be a sport or what, there is documented proof that that was approved by Pat and by the person in John's position. We are reviewing the levels of everybody in the athletics organization for their authority for hiring, for setting compensation, and for their approval of operating and capital expenditures. We want to make sure the right people have the right authority to say yes to things so that things are not double counted. And that's well underway. And then finally, we'll make sure that this reconciliation issue is taken care of, because that is frankly table stakes. We should be reconciling as soon as expenses are incurred. The next several slides are a calendar that we've laid out both for fiscal 23, what happens now at fiscal year end to get into the NCAA audit, all of the required reporting that we do, the gender equity audit. You'll see that laid out, and then beside that, what we're doing for fiscal 24. And what that is a series of meetings. Pat, myself, this table of 4, including the president, including Regent Ramos, including a member of the faculty senate, and how we will systematically make sure that we're doing that. And I wanted to lay it out in this format so that you can see we are now accountable for coming back to you with information to report from each of these meeting dates. And they're color coded because that just helps us know which meeting is which at which time. And we're happy to answer any questions about that. That's the conclusion of the slides, but to Regent Dickinson's point, now we have, of course, the action items to dig into.
I just, or Regent Ramos has a question, I believe, or a comment.
Thank you. Yeah, so walk us through what happened. We're going to improve our forecast. We're going to monitor the management system can become more robust, right? But to Regent Blankenship's point, in the context of everything going on in athletics, thanks for what you're doing. And my question really is how are you communicating this to the rest of the team and maintaining a level of, positive morale going forward while just taking on the lessons learned and fixing everything, right? So what is that communication plan looking like to address all the stakeholders in the system?
Want me to speak to athletics first? Well, I'm specific to the budget. I mean, it's something we take personal because, in a year like this, there is a level of disappointment because our athletes had one of the great years in school history. And the fact that we're talking about the budget is, a failure on all of our parts, because all we should be talking about is how they continue to outperform our resources. So that's really where a lot of the pain point is coming in from our athletic department. We're looking at this as an opportunity to get better. As you see, we're fortunate, Leslie's presence alone and her expertise. A lot of these things, we operated collaboratively with finance and administration in the past. because of, even because of Stacy's transition, a lot of things just good, bad, just for whatever reason just fell off. So if anything, we look forward to the opportunity to, with even more additional communication, collaboration. And I think our athletic department understands that that budget piece is critical for us to go forward. We do operate with less resources than really 90% of the schools in our conference. And so, I mean, we understand. I think with our athletic department, it's more about how do we move forward, because we understand what our responsibility is.
Any comment on that?
I'll go with Regent Shower and then.
There's so much to celebrate. And I think President Schultz just mentioned that in your kind of history of the two of you onboarding, there were kind of three goals that were important. Obviously operating deficit was a piece of that, but performance, field, and in the classroom is a huge success, and fundraising. And so to Regent Ramos's point, I think there is a sense of urgency around lessons learned and implementing quick controls, collaboration, which in my last 2 years in my role in on behalf of the board in that finance and administration role, I have seen continued collaboration. So I certainly know I don't show up every day. I continue to see the collaboration between the groups, and yet there has been transitions that have occurred. So this sense of urgency that's gone on in the last 4 weeks is not surprising. It's the way in which I've seen WSU show up, and in particular, athletics and finance. What I'm most excited about is the two components that I see that are being added to this are the inclusion of faculty and a regent. And so I applaud the leadership of both our president and this team to make that inclusion. And frankly, I think it should have happened a long time ago. And so I am not someone who comes from a financial background and would have ever raised my hand and suggested that I become even more integrated into that. And I believe that that transparency, that access is a really good thing for WSU and for the folks sitting at this table. So I'm thankful that you're leaning into that role, Regent Ramos. And I think that it's just another level of responsibility that we are all taking seriously. So thank you for the continued work. And I just think it's another reminder of all of the achievements that are going on and the way in which we're moving forward.
On the communication piece, we really felt it was important to do this in two major steps to the broader community. The first was about 2 weeks ago, a communication from me as president, not from athletics or finance or anywhere else, just saying we've identified a problem. We're working on that, and we're going to keep everybody informed. Those are always painful to write and to communicate out. And as you know, there was a whole lot of media attention around that internally and externally. We felt we then needed to follow up with specifics to the internal and external campus communities. We did that with a number so that if people, I wanted members of our community internally and externally to have to want to be ignorant about it, and say, nobody tried to hide it. We're being as open and transparent as practically possible, and we're making sure that people can see it and understand where it is. Now, being transparent and somebody saying, well, where's the accountability part? I'm not saying the two of those are equal. We first, though, need to be really open about this, and we've tried to really do that in a really systematic way. We also decided to put all of this information out last week, so media, alumni, I don't care who, could go in and look and say, here's your plan, here's what you did, all that kind of thing. So, Jeanette, we've tried to really be careful and thoughtful about our communication strategy on what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. In my conversations too with Chair Dickinson, she volunteered to sit down and meet with a couple of legislative colleagues that have expressed concerns about intercollegiate athletics as the chair of the Board of Regents, so that that person didn't go as the board paying attention to this stuff at all. So I think we've tried to be thoughtful, and we've tried to be open, and we've tried to not hide that, hey, this was some screw up on our part. And we're going to focus now on fixing it. And so we can always look back and say we could have done something part of that differently, but I feel pretty good about what we did over the last 2 weeks on our rollout.
Okay, any other comments for the good of the order on the report before we get into the individual action items? Okay, let's look at action item number 1.
Thank you, Regent Dickinson. And action item 1 is the review of the fiscal 23, where we project we will end at the on June 30. We've gone through that information and you have that included in the action item. This includes the operating deficit of $8 million and the 3.5 million expected operating deficit from the Pac-12 media rights, accumulating to an $11.5 million deficit. Below that table in the action item, you have a snapshot of the accumulated deficit. Action item 2 is actually the resolution of that to make the transfers at year end.
On this, questions that anybody on the board might have?
When we do action item number 2, I think the conversation and discussion, clarification, I just think it's really important that we're clear about where the money is not coming from. So I don't know in what form, fashion, how we want to do that, but I really appreciate the clarification, particularly around the idea that it's coming from interest revenue as opposed to tuition, state funds, student fees, anything that others might see as out of their pocket. I don't know how you want to handle that, but it's important.
We will do, assuming the board approves these different things, we will clearly do a communication back to campus saying, here's what the board approved, here's what the action items, those types of things as part of I say internal and external communications like they're different. To be honest, we put out something, there's a lot of interest in this, it's picked up, and we will make sure that those things are clarified in there, including that we're not using tuition dollars to cover this and things like that. So
yeah, I want to be yes, go ahead. Thank you.
It feels like we're playing this game where we're talking about the money that has to be used to support the academic enterprise versus the money that could be used to serve the academic enterprise. And so feels to me like some of this money could have instead been used to support the academic enterprise.
I think it's fair to say that any interest income or whatever that's used for assisting with intercollegiate athletics, you can say, if you didn't use it for that, could you be using it for something else? I think the answer is certainly yes. Is it a reoccurring dollar figure that you could use for the type of thing you would do every year? I would argue probably not, because you don't want to start using one-time types of money for reoccurring things. That gets you in real trouble real fast. So I think we've been really careful about that, but that's, to be honest, yes. Anytime we use money for thing A, that means that we've decided not to use it for thing B. So yes, and we can, I'm happy to make sure that people see the language before we put it out.
Just to follow up on that though, I'm not sure exactly what the interest was from. But if it was interest off of revenues received from donors and things like that, that would, by necessity, I would think, belong to, it should be used for athletics if that was the intended use of what the principal was for. But I just don't know. So I don't know. I wasn't sure if it truly is discretionary or not. And it's a small point. I don't think you need to. But that was just my question about whether.
It would be my understanding that would come from unrestricted funds that does have the discretionary, as opposed to restricted donor funds
that are designated.
Well, that's what I was wondering.
But all I'll say is we'll be as open as practically possible about this so that people know. Yeah. But we're not, it's not going to be anything that people would go, well, I can't believe you. I mean, people can say, I don't like the decision, but nobody's going to say that is not an appropriate use of the dollars. So I want to make those two things very different, because one is we decided to do this. Other people could say, well, I would have made a different decision and that's okay. Another is it appropriate? And I will tell you, it will be appropriate, and we're not going to do anything that would be seen as fiscally inappropriate. And we'll make that clear in our communications.
Yes, Regent.
Can someone help me understand the consequences of saying no, that we're not going to cover the deficit? Not going to approve action item number 2.
The consequence of not covering the deficit for 2023 is your question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, I'm gonna say the expenses are already incurred, so the deficit is a real deficit. There is a state law that requires that at the conclusion of the fiscal year, we clear the non-core expenditure. So anything that is considered an auxiliary enterprise, whether it be housing and dining, whether it be athletics, those have to come to zero at the end of the fiscal year. That's why this action item 2 is a series of transfers that have to be made to actually clear the cash deficit at the year end. And Matt's going to walk through that, but the deficit has already occurred. We can't say no to it. We already have it in our books. It exists. The dollars have been spent, unfortunately.
And I will say the fund transfer piece, unfortunately, has been part of our annual Regents meetings since I've been president. This is not a new thing. We've had to do it every year to cover it and then transfer the money back. And people can look and say, it seems weird you have to do that, but Leslie explained why. So I want to make it clear every year, unfortunately, the Regents have to do this, or at least during my 7 years, to cover this. And so that is not this. I want to make it clear. This, unfortunately, is not a new thing that hasn't had to be done in the past. And I'm not arguing again whether it's right or not. It's just the fiscal realities of where we are.
In the fund transfers to cover this and then the paying back, have we ever missed a time in which we did not pay those funds back?
To transfer the year end.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I can take that one. So mechanically, how that works is and I'm just be an accounting nerd for a minute here. So as of on June 30th, we look at the cash fund balance in all of the athletics funds. And by law, if there's a deficit there, we need to transfer in funds to close that to zero. And we use that using non-state, non-tuition funds. As outlined in action item number 2, we calculate the amount that will be needed. We think that will be approximately $74 million this year. There is some timing that can happen right around year end that can be different than the reports you've seen in action item 1 and action item 3, because that's cash versus an accrued basis, which is how we report the finances. So there can be some differences in those, but we think $74 million would be the max amount that we would need to do that. We transfer those funds in via journal entry on 6/30 at the end of the fiscal year. That closes our books and balances the fund for athletics. Immediately the next day on 7/1 of the new fiscal year, University Accounting reverses all of those transfers. And what that does is that restores the full impact of the deficit underneath the athletic fund balances. So is fully accounted for and reported there. So I am 100% confident in that university's accounting work on that every year, that the deficit that we're tracking for athletics is the full deficit, that nothing's lost in that transfer back and forth. That's procedurally how that's done.
Thank you for clarity on that. Regent Chilton, do you have any other further questions on that?
No, thank you.
Okay, let's take action item number 1. I am moving that the Board of Regents approve an athletics budget adjustment for fiscal year 2023 as proposed, and I'm looking for a second. Thank you, Regent Powell. Any further discussion on this action item? Okay. And we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Motion passes. Moving then to action item number 2. This is our fiscal year 2023 transfers to cover cumulative athletic department deficit that Matt just walked us through. I move that the Board of Regents approve transfers necessary at fiscal year 2023 year end to cover the athletics budget deficit balances as proposed. I am looking for a second.
Second.
Thank you, Regent Cerna. Any further discussion or questions we might have on this process? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you, motion passes. Moving into our third action item, which is the approval of the athletic budget for 2024. I move that the Board of Regents athletics budget approval for fiscal, oh, I'm sorry, the wrong one. I move that the Board of Regents approve, well, okay. Where's the delegation of authority?
That's the next one.
That's number 4.
Oh, I don't have a fourth. Okay, can you, I don't have a fourth.
We can borrow one.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you, I didn't have that one. Okay, so we'll go to action item 3, I apologize. Again, I'm looking for a motion for the board to approve the athletic budgets for the budget approval for fiscal year 2023 as proposed.
24.
Yeah, see, sorry, okay, so thank you, 2024. So I'm going to restate that. I move that the Board of Regents athletic budget approval for fiscal year 2024 as proposed. And I'm looking for a second. Thank you, Jeanette, or Regent Ramos. Any further discussion? Regent McDonald.
I'd like to take a minute to make sure that I understand sort of the big picture of what's going on in the university as far as finances. And my understanding from the last Regent meeting was that there's a 6% budget cut being given to most of the other department university.
That's correct.
And what I'm looking at right now is a budget that's about 6% above what the revenue was for fiscal year 23.
Right.
So I personally am really struggling with the point you made, Brett, about where are we fitting athletics relative to other things that the university is doing, and what's the opportunity cost of continuing to run this deficit? You mentioned that some of this money is appropriate for a one-time thing, but it doesn't feel to me like this has been a one-time thing. So I'm really struggling with supporting the budget as presented.
Thank you for those comments. Other comments?
One other, I guess it'd be a question perhaps to council, is a lot of action items we stew over, at least overnight, or from a previous meeting, and we have not read the statute that we're taking action rather than a future action, and if you could speak to that, if we should amend this budget.
Yes, so the bylaws of the Board of Regents require that before an action item is voted on by the Board of Regents, that it be brought as a future action item. There are 2 exceptions to that rule. The first is that it's brought to a committee and then later to the poll at the same meeting. Obviously, this meeting doesn't have any committees, so that exception doesn't apply. The other exception is the chair waives that requirement. The chair having made the motion on 2 action items, third, waive that.
Understood. Thank you.
I had also just a question on the 2024 budget. We had dropped to sort of below the line, the deficit, I guess, from the media rights.
The Pac-12.
And so kind of treating that as not really being part of the balanced budget attempt.
Correct.
So we're really 4.4 in the hole, right?
That's correct.
Why are we thinking of that as not being part of the balancing exercise?
we've treated the operations of athletics as one thing, and then this issue with the Pac-12 as being a separate thing that they did not have operational control over, because to Pat's point, what they understood the Pac-12 media rights contract to be able to provide was far less than what has happened, and certainly this overrun with the two digital partners and the facility in San Francisco, we did not feel that that was appropriate to pass that through as an operating item, because the operations of athletics are continuing just as they are to meet the student athletes' needs and to meet the obligations that we've set. So we have pulled that aside in both of the years.
Okay, but it does further implicate the university having to close that.
That is correct. It adds to that accumulated deficit, absolutely.
So is there a plan? I mean, it goes back to this fundamental question about institutional support versus, is there a plan to fill that gap somehow or to grow out of that deficit in some way?
I think Pat will, and the president will speak to this. You know, there have been a three-pronged approach to athletics over the past several years, and that's one, to come to a balanced budget, which for 23, before this occurred, they were finally in a balanced budget, to accumulate some reserves for simple operations. You know, if there's a coaching change, if there's anything like that, you have to have reserves set aside to be able to adjust to that on the fly. And then certainly addressing the accumulated deficit has to be part of that discussion, but the first two had to happen before that. I think if this year the media rights issue had not occurred, had we not had the overrun, we'd be sitting here looking at a fiscal 24 budget and trying to address what was the $80 million deficit, what was the $80 million accumulated deficit. We're not there. So now we have to go back and now address not an $80 million deficit, but a larger deficit, and figure out how we're going to come to getting that. To Regent McDonald's point is, how does that fit in the holistic view of the university's operation? It's not just athletics, it's athletics in the context of the rest of the university. So I think that's a bigger discussion to be had. And frankly, that's one that, with the Regent Ramos sitting at the table and the faculty senator, we're going to have to bring that up. But also, Regent Dickinson's point is athletics subsidized or is it not?
Well, I think my question too around the subsidy is, maybe this gets a little bit to where Regent McDonald might be coming from as well, but you know, you've had some amazing accomplishments in fundraising, but at some point, do you need to be fundraising for an operating deficit instead of new facilities? And I mean, it's not very sexy, and I understand that, but you also have, I think, alumni and donors who enjoy the fruits of a really great athletic department and teams that, you know, and if they want that to sustain and continue, do we need to change our mindset and our messaging and be looking for outside resources through our donors to help subsidize the athletic department? I mean, I don't know, you know, if that's not again, I know it's not the sexy thing to do, but I think it's something that needs to be on the table and maybe already is.
Well, we do already with our scholarship budget, and the only example I can give you is our football operations building, which is going to be 10 years old. Once it was up, and it's a huge part of our debt, there's no more fundraising that can be done for that. We've talked to donors. It is not something that moves us forward. I mean, we've asked our donors for more help because of this change in the Alston ruling. Ultimately, our scholarship bill goes up $2 million more a year. It is. I understand what's on the table, but historically, those are fundraising conversations that just end with a no historically. So, and we've asked for more help this year because of our annual fund, and that's where they help subsidize our budget, is pay for our scholarship bill. And that has been complicated because of the whole NIL piece. The reality is the donors we've typically gone to over the course of the last 18 months now have other options relative to going directly to our student athletes, and there are impacts that we're going to feel continuing unless we get help from Congress on that. So the whole dynamic has shifted. If I could just add one more piece, and I know Leslie touched on it, but I think it's imperative that everyone recognizes that the gray areas in FY25 and beyond for the Pac-12 piece. We made a decision as an institution over a decade ago based on a failed vision. what Leslie and Kirk, where we're going with this is, yes, we do see a pathway forward with what the next TV deal is. Kirk personally worked on the college football playoff expansion. That's going to impact us, but you don't see that reflected in some gross inflated number in FY25 and beyond. So I just remind everyone, this year, it is our belief it's an aberration. I think we've proven it over time that we've been fiscally responsible. We've done our best. We operate our athletic program with, you know, we take pride. We're the most fiscally efficient athletic program in the country. We do more with less resources. It's been well documented by people who cover us. So when we go through the exercise of cutting things, it is painful because we're already asking our coaches and our athletes to do with less. So I just want, as we, and in terms of just how we're behaving as we go forward, this is very different than how we've operated years ago that put us in this place, but we are in solution mode, and you know, I have great confidence we'll get there.
I mean, I kind of feel like we need to come to resolution on this, and it's because we're sort of asking you to do a lot of different things. Obviously, this particular, it's too bad that this situation happened with the you know, the lack of controls in the spending process. But we're asking you to do a lot of different things, pay for some legacy issues, and then also run a very tight, difficult ship in a conference that's difficult for a lot of other reasons. And we need to decide, what are we going to require you to do? You know, and we haven't been clear about that. And I feel like that's really coming to a head, and we need to just make a decision on that, as opposed to deciding every year, which I feel like we've sort of been doing.
But that's sort of like, in my view, it's sort of like the debt ceiling conversation.
Exactly.
Right? And so we kind of, I mean, we need to do what we need to do to keep the wheels on the bus and keep things moving forward. But I think from my perspective and a more holistic view, this goes into conversations about who are we as a university? What is happening right now? What are trends? What's happening with enrollment? How many majors do we have? What kind of a university do we want to be? What are we going to offer? Where does this athletic money go? I'd love to see the breakout between every different sport, football, basketball, women's sports, to understand, so I can see this big picture. Is this entertainment? Is this requirement to have a university, or are we going to lean into the, and where higher education is going in the next decade and beyond? Because I think we're operating on old premises and models of what we, and I don't think we're looking forward strategically. And this trips us up every. So I don't pretend to have any of the answers. I think this is really a thorny issue, but I think it's an incredible opportunity, absolutely incredible opportunity to really think about what we want to be going forward and how we want this to look. And again, become the university and the board and that others aspire to be, because we really think of it.
I think the question and the comment that you raised, Regent McDonald, is the right one. And I listened to your response, Pat, and I think faculty could be saying the same thing. Administrative staff could say the same thing. Students could say the same thing. We are asking everyone to do all of the things in an exceptional and outstanding way with limited resources. And it is a challenge that I just don't think that we can continue to ask. So I really appreciate both Regent Redmond and Regent Shetler's comments, and am looking forward to the rest of today, which is really meant to be a strategic conversation. I think, to Regent Shetler's point, we need to keep moving forward, and I'm supportive of moving forward with this budget. I would like to see very clearly how we're resolving the $400,000 when we meet again. I am uncomfortable about this in a way that I am hoping we can resolve the bigger issue so we don't arrive in the same place again, where these fundamental questions are being raised when you need an answer on a budget. And I think that really what we're really trying to say here is, how do we try and help to support all of those functions without giving direction to our president? Go do all the things with very limited resources, because it's just a level of focus that is impossible for anyone to meet, let alone all of the folks that are in that leadership team together. So again, admiration for the way in which this is moving forward, and concern it's too much, and how do we really get very clear on what we say yes to, and then inevitably what we're going to say no to. So
Kirk, before we move forward, and because there's that gray area of 25, 26, can you give us an update and some insight on where this Pac-12 media situation sits and what's appropriate to share at this time?
Sure, there's two pieces to it, and Pat mentioned one of them, and I want to reiterate back that the expansion of the college football playoff is a financial game changer for all of the Power 5 schools, to the tune likely of several $1 million per year per school, not for making the playoffs, just simply for being in a Power 5 conference. So, that was a lot of work that went into that appropriately, and WSU played a lead role in getting that across the finish line, because I knew it impacted our bottom line as much as anybody, and at some particular point, that was going to be important. So let's, put that on there, and it's shown in gray a little bit, but that's one thing. The other part of that is the Pac-12 media deal. We expect to have a resolution by the end of the month. I mean, when we thought some of these things with the Pac-12 revenue would be an issue back in January and February, we thought, well, we're going to have the media deal signed. So by the time a board sees it, you see here's the challenges, and here's the new revenue above and beyond coming in, and you say, okay, we got an issue to take care of for a year, but there's actually some longer term solutions. I never thought we would still be in June negotiating and working with our media partners around what that final deal is going to be. So there is that out there, and at least the projections that Pat and I and others have seen, I'm not sure if it'll be a lot larger than we saw in the past. It shouldn't be a lot smaller than the past. It may be fairly flat, but when we add the football playoff dollars onto that, we should see a nice bump in revenue. So if we can control expenses, then all of a sudden you go, okay, now we actually have additional dollars coming in that can be strategically allocated, including debt reduction, building up a reserve fund, and some of those kind of things. I really thought that would be part of our conversation today back in March, and the fact that we're not there yet. I mean, I've just emphasized to our commissioner, it's been the worst of both worlds. We have been out in front with nationally communicating about the issues with Comcast. We were the first school to actually talk about it, and the board to talk about it, without the positiveness of here's what our new revenue media deal looks like. So I just always want to be careful. What Pat and I learned from our legacy issue was you can't throw a number up there, build a budget off it, and then find out later that you were $5 million off in that number because you took the best projections that were there and said, hey, let's just do it. And then when it doesn't come to pass, we put ourselves in a really tough spot. I can't overemphasize, we can't build a budget off of projections that have no basis in reality. And that's what got us here. And we just got to be careful not doing that moving forward.
On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you believe that you'll actually get there at the end of June?
Who are you talking to? No, sorry. Sorry, moment of levity. Right.
Yeah, because it would. I mean, it's kind of been a little bit of like
I know
Groundhog Day.
And that's why I don't like to talk to the media about this, because I already said I think it's imminent, and it's been imminent, for 3 months. I put it at probably to a 7. So.
Okay. Before I ask for the second, I just want to make sure that, number one, Regent McDonald's concerns are valid, and I appreciate the questions raised. And I think that you recognize the Board of Regents understand the concerns with that too. I want to be clear that we hear Regent Chilton in regards to, what those consequences what the ramifications may or may not be. We recognize we have a fiduciary responsibility by law that the state drives on some of this. It doesn't make it any easier, however, to be a regent and to represent, the communities of this state and our taxpayers, recognizing we are not using state dollars and not using tuition dollars. It's still a difficult thing. And as I stated, as we started this, the credibility issue is really tough. And I know that you're feeling it, and we are all feeling that, quite frankly. Some of us get it more than others, depending upon where you live. So going forward, I appreciate, and I think that the board per regent blankenship, we need to be seeing this on a regular basis. It needs to become a part of our everyday agenda as we move ahead. I want to thank both Regent McDonald and Regent Ramos for being a voice at the table and working with all of you on a monthly basis for this. I would like to circle back in September, understanding when there is a media deal complete, just what those gray areas, what that starts to look like. Let's finish this out so we can really actually be looking at some projections for the future. And I think your pieces around hiring freezes and areas around compensation and expenses, and you just really cannot stress enough how mindful we need to be, because as Regent Shower said, faculty could be saying the same thing and what's been asked of them. And at the end of the day, we are saying, and administration, I mean, there isn't anybody in this institution that is not trying to do the right thing here and hasn't been not trying for the last 5 years of just consistently. All of our chancellors, as I look around the table, I mean, what's being asked of everybody is a heavy, heavy lift. So we're all in this boat together. And so we're just got to kind of try to keep rowing in the same direction and staying unified the best way we can. Because the worst thing we can do is become fractured and triangulated on this issue as an institution. We see that happen, and that's not good for anybody. Most importantly, it is not good for the student experience. And that's why we're here, is for their education and what we're able to provide for them. So that being said, thank you. Truly appreciate the diligence and intention that you've come to us with, and ask for that continued going forward. So we have a motion on the floor at this time to approve the 2024 Board of Regent athletics budget for the fiscal year of 2024, and I am looking for a second.
Second.
Thank you, Regent Cerna. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Thank you, Regent McDonald.
And I will emphasize that this is a symbolic vote to say that we got to do better. It's not a reflection of a disagreement with where the board is at.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. At this time, the motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we will move into our fourth action item, which is actually the delegation of authority to President Schultz or a designee to approve, amend, and execute contracts or other agreements related to the university's athletic media rights. Kirk, do you want to give a little context just to that?
Yeah, Nathan is also here and he can provide some context. So over the last several months, Nathan and his colleagues at the 10 Pac-12 schools have been working on the legal document that would constitute the grant of rights that we would assign so that we can pursue a media deal, a media partner. The problem is we don't know it, and this requires board approval. And what we wanted to do is, the commissioner has said, once we have a deal, we may need to try and execute the grant of rights, over a couple days. And what we didn't want to do is have some frantic board meeting in the middle of the summer to do something that people would look at and say is actually fairly routine. So Nathan and I talked, and I'll let him give a few comments. We also talked to our counterparts, University of Washington, and we came up with the idea to delegate it to me in consultation with the board chair or the board vice chair, whomever's available, so that we could execute those once a media deal is done fairly quickly without having to call a formalized board meeting. Obviously, assuming we get this done, we will review all this stuff in, you know, at our next regularly scheduled board meeting. So it's not an attempt to circumvent anything, but just to make sure that we're being expedient when we need to be. Now, some other places around the country in the Pac-12 footprint don't require board approval of theirs. And so it's every school's a little bit different, every state's a little bit different. Nathan, what have I missed or what would you amend?
No, I think that was a great summary. Obviously, any media deal that the Pac-12 signs, those media partners are going to want to know for certain that all of the schools that are in the conference are, you know, pledging their media rights with their athletics department. Otherwise, there's nothing for those media partners to purchase, basically. So they're going to need that as a requirement to have any deal done. That obviously will happen fairly quickly. It will be difficult to have the Board of Regents quickly amass for a meeting to review that. As Kirk noted, other schools, it's not a requirement just because of the way the delegations or the state law in different areas works. At WSU right now, the current delegation for Kirk's general contracting authority is $5 million. Obviously, any grant of media rights is going to be well in excess of $5 million value. There are some areas where Kirk has delegated authority that has no limits on it. For instance, in contracting with heating and supplies for the university and things like that. So it's not unprecedented to have a delegation like this, but it just currently is not on the books. And so that's the request here to do that. We have been, legal counsel has been reviewing different drafts of the grant of rights. That's been going on for some time. So it's been well vetted and is ready to go when the time is right. Happy to address any questions anybody has about it.
Get it done.
Yeah, get it done. Scale of 1 to 10, 7.
Thank you.
Okay.
10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We have a motion then to approve the Board of Regents approve a delegation of authority to President Schultz, authorizing the president or his designee to approve, amend, and execute contracts or other agreements to the University of Athletics media rights as proposed. Thank you. Second, as from Regent Redmond, any further board discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. You know what? Everybody deserves a little break. So we are going to take, it is 9:50. We are very far behind, which is okay. We'll convene at 10 o'clock and move into our WSU online portal training.
Good job. Moving it along.
Okay, we are reconvening from our break. And next up on our agenda, we have Laura Hamilton joining us, as well as Teresa joining us. And we are going to be doing a mandatory training on WSU Learning Portal.
Right.
So welcome.
We're happy to be here today and happy to be following the athletics budget discussion. No,
Teresa, you're gonna have to. Yeah.
sorry, I'm Teresa Elliott Cheslick. I'm the Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer for WSU. And with me today is Laura Hamilton, who's our Learning and Organizational Development Manager. We're going to be showcasing WSU's new learning management system. It's called Percipio, as we walk through the access for the Board of Regents for their mandatory training. And I'll turn it over to Laura.
Perfect. And I am a presenter, so I project my voice very well. So hopefully you'll all be able to hear me. Desiree was kind enough to pass out to each of you a one sheet that I put together that will have the overview of the instructions that we're going to go through. Instead of putting together a traditional PowerPoint presentation, I thought I would just walk you through how to log into Percipio, how to access the content, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I will say we are very fortunate to have such a robust system with Percipio, so I'm really excited to share it with you. You'll see that I have put into the browser the web address that's on the instructions. That is how you will access the content in Percipio. So,
and this will all be emailed to you also.
It'll also be emailed to Desiree, who will share it with you. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my email address. You will use either your email address, your Regents email address, or you can use your first initial and your last name. Either one of those will work for the login. The first time you go to log in, it is going to ask you to change your password. I set up the same password for all of you for your initial login, so it is on that sheet for you as well. So this is what Percipio is going to look like when you log into the system. This side of the system that you log into is called the core side of Percipio, and it is where the purchase content that we have in Percipio resides. We did grant the Regents access to all of the curated content that we have within the system. There are some really exciting leadership training materials and opportunities within the core side that we wanted you to have access to if you were interested. Percipio also on a regular basis offers leadership boot camps that they will run live sessions that you would be welcome to participate in if you're interested. What we're going to talk about though is going to be the required trainings. So if you click on your initials in the upper right-hand corner, you will see an option that says compliance. If you click on compliance, it's going to take you to the other portion of the Percipio platform, and that is the compliance portion. The compliance portion at the very top will show, and I have all of my required trainings completed, but it will say required trainings. Those required trainings for all affiliates and employees of WSU will show at the very top with the date of when they're due. So you will have, as you log in the first time, a set of 4 required trainings that you'll have access to. One of the other things I wanted to point out, though, I've worked with Danielle Hess, and we have gotten some of the Attorney General's trainings added in here. And so eventually you may see those added at the top as a part of your required trainings, because the Board of Regents does have a cycle of within which they have to take some of those trainings as well. So all of the required trainings are going to live within compliance. There are a number of additional trainings on different compliance matters that you might be interested in. You're welcome to go in and take any of those that you would like to, but any of the ones that you need to take and have a due date will populate at the top. The other thing that will happen is once you've completed your training, some of those are required to be done then on an annual basis. 90 days before it's due again, you will have it repopulate in Percipio, and Percipio will send you an email to let you know that a required training has been added. So it will track your annual requirement for you, so you know when you need to go back in to engage in additional training.
Can I ask Laura, and maybe this is a question more for IT or something, and I might be the only one. I get the great privilege of working for a bank and a credit union, and there's no way I'll ever get access to this through my computer. So are we looking at devices that we can provide that a regent can have with them at all time, or have at home?
So is the question really, will we be able to do this from our iPads? I think we can, right?
You can access this from your iPad. Yes, it does not have to be a computer.
Okay, so
the content can be accessed from a cell phone, an iPad, a computer, any device of that nature.
Yeah, I'm not able to do it on my work computer. I just want to make sure that we need to reissue those iPads, I think.
And probably
update those, because it won't, for me personally, that won't be an option for me.
Firewall.
No, but we've tried that a couple times. Yeah. Allowing you. Yeah, no, my IT department's tried it a couple times. It hasn't worked.
We'll take care of that.
Okay.
We got
Perfect.
that. So thank you.
Yeah,
perfect. Thank you.
The other information that I did include on the bottom of this sheet is some of the browser help information and things of that nature. There is nothing more frustrating than going through a required training and not getting credit for it. And so there are some things that we have found with Percipio that's not unique to just their platform. Microsoft Edge is not a supported browser for these trainings. So if you do use Edge, you are taking a chance that your training may not record. So we do recommend using Firefox, Chrome. If you do have the iPads, you'll most likely be using Safari. All of those work fantastically. The required trainings are also not trainings where you can begin them, take a pause, and then step back to them. They all will tell you as you go into them how long they are. You will want to make sure you have enough time that you can complete it in one session. That's not going to be the same for any of the training opportunities and options you decide to engage in on core. Those can be done in a multitude of sessions because they record differently because they're not in compliance. So if you'll allow me, I would love to show you a few of the things that do exist in core, because it really is a pretty cool system and there is a lot of content available. A few of the things that I'd like to highlight, there is an area for skills benchmarks. So again, this is that main landing page when you log in. If you click on Get Started Now, it's going to give you a list of over 200 skills benchmarks that are available that all of our employees have the ability to go in. You can click on Communications Essentials. It's going to take you 16 minutes to go through the skills benchmark with 16 questions. At the end of that, the system's going to provide for you, based on your responses and how you did with the benchmarking, here's some trainings that we think may be really beneficial for you in the work that you perform. So that's been a really fantastic resource that we have available when people are just not sure where to start with some of the training that they may want to do. Percipio this year has built into the system the ability for individuals to say, here's the role that I hold with the institution. And then the system will provide training opportunities and options based on the work that they perform. We are working this next year with Percipio to take job descriptions and some of the standard functions in those, and to align our WSU job descriptions with training programs that can exist for the current role someone holds, but also for promotional opportunities that they may be interested in. The last thing that I wanted to highlight is there are a multitude of journeys that are available for you, for all of our employees of WSU, where they can type in any particular topic that they might be interested in. Leadership has been one that's been a huge request that we've had over a period of time. It breaks it out by filter, so you can look and say, hey, I want to look at a book on leadership, or they can go to these journeys. These Aspire journeys provides for them pre-curated content that they can go through each set of courses and earn a badge for any particular topic that they may be interested in. Again, we felt it may be beneficial and something that you would be interested in to be able to go into the content. So you do have access to both, and you're welcome to engage in that as much or as little as you would like to, but please do complete the required trainings. So can I answer questions?
When are the current set of required trainings due?
The current set of required trainings are going to show in your profiles is due within 6 months. I would highly encourage not waiting the 6 months. Because
I just didn't want it to be tomorrow.
No. Yeah, we are trying to work very heavily towards providing the data and information to all of the areas on anyone who is behind on required trainings so that we have better compliance with that. So if you can make it a bit of a priority, that would be beneficial, but technically you would have 6 months from yesterday.
Okay.
Did I hear you say you have 4 trainings?
There are 4 required trainings. There also is a safety training that would be a 5th that you only need to take 1 time. If you have ever taken it previously in prior platforms, you would not need to take it again. So it will show under optional. Those are outlined on our website, and I did put the link to that on the one sheet that you'll receive.
What are the 4?
There's discrimination, sexual harassment and misconduct, hazing prevention. Now I'm going to forget the other ones. Cybersecurity and IT, and then state ethics. So the 5th one would be safety. Safety is broken out into 2 modules. So it's a little easier to get through since you do have to complete it in 1 sitting.
One quick question. I'm kind of surprised that something like ethics was not one of them, because
state ethics is one of them. Yes.
Oh, okay, I missed that.
Yes.
What was the 3rd?
The 3rd one was cybersecurity.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you for being so on top of this, and thank you for the 1-pager. It's very helpful to take that as a takeaway. Any other questions for Teresa or Laura at this time?
Do you know how long all 4 are? Like what's
Total time.
What's my total time?
Total time to get through the 4 would be less than 2 hours.
Good, perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Could my bank training on all those just transfer over?
Yeah. Do I need?
I got those reminders right now too. Yes, I'll be doing some training this weekend. Right? Doing the exact same ones?
Yeah.
So, right. Transfer student, yes. Okay, thank you so much, you guys. Appreciate it. Okay, we are going to move. All right, at this time, we are going to conclude the business portion of our retreat. I think what I'd like us to do is, do we need to take a break? We don't, I think we can right into it, right? Okay. All right, so we are going to move straight into our retreat.